Hi there. Good morning. Hope you guys are having good time, good day so far. So welcome everyone. This is the post-event conversation of Agility, Resilience, and Anti-Fragility 2022 event that we had last month. And today's topic is gonna be Risk-savvy Entrepreneurship with Phill Adhir and Jaden Powell, where we had a conversation in the conference, and we will try to dig deep in this deconstructed session. So that said, let's welcome both Phill and Jaden.
Hey, good morning
Good morning.
or good
Hi,
afternoon
Jaden.
now.
Good to have you back.
Good morning.
Thanks for
So,
having me.
thank you. And before we dive in and explore more areas of risk-savvy entrepreneurship, to set the stage and in context, we're gonna do quick introductions, and then maybe we're gonna discuss some of the questions that we already discussed briefly for next 5-7 minutes, and then we're gonna explore more about risk-savvy entrepreneurship. Sounds
Absolutely.
good?
Let's
Sure.
do it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. All right, then. Let's start with introductions.
Sure. I'm Phil Alhir. I am a healthcare executive that has been in the industry for about 25 years, worked in corporate America for approximately 12 to 15 years in various roles in from sales to operations, training, director to VP level, and have been in different in various entrepreneurial roles in healthcare for the past 12 to 15 years, um, basically transforming organizations from um, startups to full grown companies, and uh, usually like to have been in turnaround situations and transformation of organizations. And that's kind of been my specialty.
Thank you, Phil. Welcome again. Jaden?
And my name is Jaden Powell. I'm a film, TV, and live event producer. So we do anything from movies, commercials, TV shows. I've had the very I've worked with many companies like NBC Universal, Warner Brothers. I've worked with VH1 on a number of shows like what is it called, The Real. I've worked on Ridiculousness and Black and Crew Compton. So I've worked on a couple shows here in Hollywood. And after getting my success in Hollywood, it prompted me to start a nonprofit in my local community called Young Americans Creating Culture, which I've worked with Phil on a few events for in the past. But that's pretty much who I am and what I do. I do media production, nonprofit wise for youth, and then we also do for profit media production.
Yes. Thank you, Jaden. And we are glad to have from Deconstructed have you back. So now, ever so quickly, a quick introduction from my perspective is I'm leadership and transformation coach, works closely with teams as well as leaders across the levels of an organization to to help everyone to operate at their optimum levels to achieve the business outcomes. That said, let's dive into the topic, and then obviously it's all about risk savvy entrepreneurship and all that stuff. So how the first thing is, what is risk for you guys? So how do you cope up with risk, and what does that all about for you?
Hmm. Good question, Phil. Do you wanna kick this one off?
I think risk is always calculated, and it's a state of mind. I think as an entrepreneur, you take each risk as as it comes in front of you, um,
Mhm.
and you're always taking a risk. Everything we do is a risk. Whether you're in corporate America or you're an entrepreneur, you're taking a risk. Each move that we make is a risk. I mean, you're always have a risk there. So that state of mind of what is the risk and what is your level of risk, and it's risk reward. So
Mhm.
what we do is we balance risk and reward, and
Mhm.
how our skill set and our team's skill set can take that risk and get a reward from it, and how we can leverage that to generate a reward for
Yeah,
those.
and building off of what Phil said is like risk, it's similar but different. So for me, what determines a risk for me is pretty much just determines the stage of life I'm in, because at each stage of my life, my risk is different and what I consider to be a risk is different. So maybe let's say 3 years ago, let's say I want to sponsor an event, but 3 years ago I didn't have like the 2,500 to do it. So if I were to come up with that money, that for me at that time would have been a risk. Versus now, if I want to sponsor an event, it's not so much as like 2,500 to sponsor wouldn't be as much of a risk. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that my risk and how I calculate my risk changes depending on my mental state, like Phil mentioned, or like the state in life that I'm at. And so I think risk for me is just calculated by each phase of life. It just depends on what's going on in life and the other pieces that are going on for me to really calculate what a risk is. But at the end of the day, the risk is, is my reward going to be greater than that risk, or does it just go back to me taking just a high risk decision? So definitely piggybacking off of what Phil said, the risk and the reward, is it greater, is it less than? You got to look at those things. What stage am I in? So that's what being risk savvy is to me, or like taking the risk.
And I also think that when we're looking at risk, you mentioned, and we have to look at what state of the society or economy or everything that we're in right now. So I think even when we look at the time of the timing of this talk, the timing of these seminars or webinars that we're doing, you're doing agility and fragility and webinars that we're doing right now. These are perfect timing for these four folks to listen to, because let's look at what's going on. And I'm going to get on a soapbox right now, but let's look at what's going on in our economy and our time. And we do have to be agile. We do have to look at what risks and things that we're taking, and it might be the time to take those risks. If we look at what's going on right now in our economy and what's going on in corporate America, I think I mentioned this last time. I looked on LinkedIn. There were 600,000 entrepreneurs. Well, not to be, what I don't know what the word is for it, but I think that number is going to jump from 600,000 to a million, and you're probably going to have a million more consultants on LinkedIn at this point, because there's always a pendulum, and that pendulum swings from one end to the other. And that pendulum is now swinging. Every day I go on the news and there's more layoffs, and that pendulum is swinging. So Silicon Valley just laid off 20,000 people. 35 hospital systems laid off people. Netflix is laying off people.
Yes.
Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers laid off.
Every industry and every big or small. Yes.
All these people are laying off people. So now we have to say, people are going to have to step back and say, what risk am I willing to take? And in addition to that risk, you have to be agile. You have to be willing to adjust. You have to be proactive, and you have to be willing to put the work in. So there's multiple facets to being an entrepreneur, and it's a mindset, going back to that mindset. So a lot of people want things handed to them. A lot of people don't want to put the work in. They just want things handed to them. So you have to be willing to take the risk and put the work in. So it is risk reward, but it's also a timing factor and being proactive with it and thinking ahead and doing that research.
Right. Very well said, and both of you has set the stage quite beautifully and powerful comments. And Phil, you started with the entrepreneurship. What does that means for company? Risk and reward. Phil, you brought in the personal touch, how personally, individually, risk needs to be looked at, and what it is. So, if I may ask the direct question, how does risk savviness help you to evolve? And then both of you, and then Phil, you said you started in corporate America and then grown into as an entrepreneur, and then you have your own setup. And similar to Jaden, your journey, how does risk savviness at personal level helped you to grow to reach to the level where you are, and professionally how it is helping your entrepreneurship?
Well, I started from the opposite of Phil. So, Phil started in corporate America and then he went to entrepreneur, where I started as entrepreneur, and then my entrepreneurship got me to corporate America. But the thing with that is that I just felt like it was just, I don't want to say it was luck. It was great. It was grind. It was hustle. It was, calculated decisions. But a lot of it was, like Phil said, timing, because a lot of the gigs that I did or the clients that I worked for, it was all timing. And, I will say the one life-changing decision that happened to me was I was doing an event out of my own entrepreneurship. I had a catering company, filming the event, taking pictures of our food, getting content for our commercials. And, the producer for Warner Brothers, an executive producer, was there. And, I'm listening to her tell her story. Oh, people email me all the time. She's saying people email her about jobs, and like, because people are always asking her for things, she just doesn't give, because all people want is that reward. And so I was like, well, maybe I should go up to her, talk to her, take this risk, and talk to her and see if I could change my life. And then I was like, nah, I'm scared. And so I was about to walk out that room, and I share this because I stopped myself and I said, are you too scared to change your life, to take this one risk, to talk to her, to see if your life is going to change? And lo and behold, I talked to her. I didn't ask her for anything. I just said, how can I get better? And next thing I knew, I was working on a set at Warner Brothers. And so I say that, and then I've been working corporate ever since, and then mixing my own entrepreneurship with the corporate stuff that I learned. But yeah, a lot of it was it was calculated. It was, knowing when to take that risk and kind of not backing down. Because a lot, kind of like how Phil mentioned, there's a lot of people that have that entrepreneur title on LinkedIn. And, the best way I could put it is I had a older person tell me that now it seems like having a CEO or entrepreneur title is a fad. It's like everybody wants that title because it's cool, but not everybody wants to put into work to actually become that CEO or that entrepreneur. And so the reason why I shared my story was because that one conversation changed my life. That one conversation 4 or 5 years ago changed the course of what I'm doing now. So I say that to say is that right there necessarily wasn't a risk. But me talking to her, if I walked out that door, that would have been that risk. I would have risked either living a mundane, normal life or working in corporate America. And so I think with judging, like with me, like it was just that one conversation. So I don't know how to better put that. But yeah, so that's how risk has gotten me to my journey today.
Well said, Jared. Thank you. Phil?
Well, we're basically programmed from an early age. Get your education, go to college, work in corporate America. You get to corporate America, you do A, B, C, D, and do your job. You do your certain things. Well, we're put into a box. So that's that mindset of this is the box. And there's a certain, that's where I kind of said, well, some are, this check the box, and there's a work ethic and a strategy that's involved. And you take those lessons learned, and sometimes it's getting out of that box and saying, hey, what do I want to accomplish? What strategies do I
need?
What strategies do I need to have, and what it needs to be accomplished? It's not for everybody. Right. And what risks am I willing to take? And those calculated risks that you take and those lessons learned, you move forward with, and you move forward with those lessons, those calculated risks. And some people have this fear, and it is that fear and that programming that we have. If it's the fear of failure, which I fear failure, but am I okay with it? And am I going to take those lessons learned and continue to grow? That's one. Is it the fear of not having health insurance? Yes, there's a fear of that, but are there options? And in researching those options? So we're programmed on these things, and there's so many fears that are instilled in us, and willing to understand how can I achieve this and finding solutions. And that's where the agility comes in, and the solutions and being proactive and looking forward. It's looking 2 or 3 steps ahead. So when I meet with my team and when I meet with others and I meet with my business partners, we're not looking 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarters ahead. We're looking in the future and how we can be ahead of the curve versus, okay, how do we just achieve things right now? You have to be proactive and you have to look ahead. So, you look at it, and I brought up the layoffs. If you look at how corporate America's worked, Silicon Valley's led the trend.
Right.
Silicon Valley's led the trend. So I said that pendulum swinging. Well, that pendulum swings and follows Silicon Valley. So 20 years ago, I couldn't walk into a company without a shirt and tie. Look at me now. Well, where did that come from? That came from Silicon Valley. Well, now Silicon Valley said, you know what? We're tightening the grips. So guess who's following suit on that? Everybody else. I looked something up. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Just last month, 60,000 layoffs from startup companies.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Phill. Let's talk about that.
60,000 layoffs. Do you know why that happened? Probably is because startup and entrepreneurs weren't thinking ahead. They took their PPP money and they didn't think ahead. So you have to think ahead and you have to have the agility and grow and be agile enough for the change that's coming.
And that's such a great point, man, because being an entrepreneur, you have to be agile, you have to be adaptable, and like you said, you have to think forward in the future. Like, you can't just be focused on, okay, what is my fourth quarter going to look like? What is a third quarter going to look like? You have to look like, where do I want my business to be in 5 to 10 years from now? Everybody knows it takes 0 to 5 years is the make it or break it period for your business. And the reason why I said, let's talk about those layoffs. Well, because creative culture, we've been going strong for about 5 years. We're going on our 6th year. No layoffs. We haven't had to close our doors, and we're actually doing really well. And so I say this because, like you mentioned, Phill, I wasn't thinking about, what is the end half of my year looking like? I'm like, okay, what are my events for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years looking like? What clients am I going to be doing 5, 6 years down the line? Or where do I want us to be down the line? And so I'm setting us up to do that. But the thing that you really, really mentioned, and it's important because my mom actually talked to me about this the other day. She was like, you've been running your own business for X amount of years, but she was like, what about your life insurance? What about your health care? What about all these things that you need that a regular job offers that you don't get? And I said, hey, Mom, I said, well, there's options. I have health insurance. I got a health insurance plan. It may not be the traditional plan that's offered through the job, but you can go online and you can find you a health insurance plan that works for you. Hey, what about life insurance? Same deal. You go online, find your life insurance plan that works for you and your business. And then not only that, she started talking about retirement. Well, Mom, there's different things. You can open up IRA, Roths. You can open up put your money in different trust accounts and things like that. Buy property, put it away. There's different things than just you go to school, you go to that corporate America, you do what you do, and then you come home. There's more to that than there's more than that. And so with being an entrepreneur, you have to kind of like be well-rounded in all those things, like Phill was saying. You just have to go out there and be agile and kind of like adapt, and you just know that, hey, this isn't the traditional route, but it's still a route to get there. Like, there's multiple ways to put a basket in a hoop, and they all work. So there's multiple ways to be an entrepreneur, or even a risk-savvy entrepreneur. Just got to be agile, you got to adapt, and you can't be afraid to take that calculated risk.
And one thing that both Jaden and I have done is we've become, and it's servant leadership. It's servant leadership not only to our teams, but also to the community. We both
Mm-hmm.
have non-for-profits. We both work within the community. We do a ton for our community. We do not just on the nonprofit side, but we give back to the community. We're involved in the community, and that is um, it's great for the community, but it's also a brand building
Mm-hmm.
opportunity that helps with the total sense of the business that everybody wants to give back to you as well. So
Mm-hmm.
as the just and time goes on, you are part of that community, and
Right.
it's part of the strategic plan. And when you look at as you're building your strategic brand and you say, hey, being risk savvy, you put your
Mm-hmm.
strategic plan in place and you do all of these things, and you have to have the foresight to make sure you're doing it. So when you look at when I looked at the number, and it was shocking to me because this is the highest number. One, people
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
overhired because
Yes.
it became about the almighty dollar. So you have to think about that. One, it became about the almighty dollar. Two, to be pretty blunt about it, I do believe that people became a little entitled. I think we all have some employees that say, hey, I make this comment quite a bit. I got the best full-time job with part-time salary, or part-time job with full-time salary.
Or even if I may mention, Phil, let's back it up to 2020, how the government was giving people so much money that they didn't even want to come back to work.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
they took that money
So
and started their own business.
types of things. So that's where as an entrepreneur being risk savvy, you have to identify those things and think ahead of how am I how do I have the operational effectiveness? How do I have the proper strategic plan?
Mm-hmm.
How am I adjusting and being strategically effective for the
Right.
long term?
Mm.
Right. Right.
And then
So,
also too, oh,
so
sorry.
So
Jaden, if I
Go ahead.
may, not to
sorry,
interrupt the flow,
Fox.
not to interrupt the flow. In last 8 to 10 minutes, you both has covered the wide range of spectrum topics, and the highlights from my perspective. What I have noted down is check the box, the school, college, corporate job that you mentioned, Phil, and the fear is not absolute; it is relative to person, and what are the options that we have. Traditional options that we have, and a lot of people ignore to explore the other options beyond that traditionally offers, and then layoffs, why it is happening, and that one what you talked about, full-time salary with a part-time job, and that's very apt for the current trend, what's going on. And then another point, and you both implied on looking ahead, not quarter to quarter margins or profits, and what does it looks like as an organization, as an entrepreneur. So based on that, and definitely and you talked about pendulum moving from corporate America to entrepreneurship, Phil, and one question that common or commonality on all these major points is, end of the day, this is generation to generation evolution or change, how people are seeing. And then in your own capacities, you both are accomplished entrepreneurs. So that being said, what is that you want to help or offer to the younger generations? You may call it as the kids going to the school or who are in teens. What is that you offer to build that risk savviness, and whatever they want to do with their life and career, to check the box or to venture into the entrepreneurship? What do you have to offer?
So my nonprofit, I mean, we teach video production to youth and stuff, but really the knowledge that I have to offer about risk savviness, I mean, it goes deeper beyond the camera, because if I could tell any young budding entrepreneur something is, keep doing it, believe in yourself, don't ever give up, no matter what, don't ever give up. If you think you suck, bad, terrible, it doesn't matter, don't give up. And then
Mm-hmm.
two, don't compete. Everybody, a lot of creatives and artists or people, they're out here, they're trying to compete with each other, and you're never going to win if you're going to compete with each other. So I always like to tell them, don't compete, dominate. dominate your sector. Don't worry about what your competition is doing or what this other creative is doing. Worry about what you're doing, and if you're dominating your craft. That is the only way you're going to succeed in life and in your craft, is to just dominate your sector. Be the best that you can be at whatever you do. And don't compare yourself to anybody else, because that's where we kind of really get messed up, especially with social media and things. Everybody wants to post to be the best. Look at what I'm doing. Don't worry about that. Dominate your sector and you do you. That's really the only thing I can really offer, because that's what it is. It's in you. It's nothing that I can give you. It's inside of us.
For me, I worked in corporate America, and I've been a serial entrepreneur. And one thing that I learned along the way is I always had this thing, and I hear it all the time, is side hustle. Side hustle. There's no such thing as a side hustle. A side hustle is an investment. A side hustle is an investment, and a side hustle can grow, but that's just an investment. If you want to be an entrepreneur and you want something to fully succeed, you have to go all in. You have to go all in and make that commitment. And you have to do the appropriate things, which will lead to success. And that's the hard work. And the hard work is being every position, the janitor to the CEO. And you have to make those strategic decisions, and you have to clean the floors, and failure is okay. I fail every day. I failed at 10 companies, and I continue to fail, but I learn from those failures and I get better. So be all in. If you want a side hustle, that's great. Do it, but understand that's just an investment.
Right.
All in.
Yeah, you gotta know the difference. Know the difference between a side hustle and being an actual entrepreneur. It's very important.
Yeah, exactly. So on this point, and based on what you said, is Jaden, you said don't ever give up, dominate your craft. Phil, you kind of saying serial entrepreneur, all in, and then across the levels, hard work is constant. So, is there any line we can draw that it is a reasonable risk or reasonable risk savviness, or it's going beyond where we are taking big risks? And how do we differentiate, and what do you have to offer, that how do we constantly orient and decide this risk is detrimental or harmful, and we need to go back to one notch down? What are your comments there?
At least for me, I know for me, because I take really big risks. I'm actually the person that my team has to pull back and be like, yo, do you think we can do that? And I'm like, I know we can. But besides that, the way how I gauge it, because, I look at it, I really look at what's good for everyone as a whole. I don't look at what's good for me or what will benefit just my organization. I take so many other things into account. How is this going to benefit the community? How is this going to benefit the youth in the community? How is this going to benefit the leadership in the community? How about my other community-based organizations? How is this going to affect them? And so I look at things like that, and that kind of determines the risks that I take or the things that I do. Is how is this going to benefit everybody as a whole? Because like Phil mentioned, we do a lot of community work. And so with my nonprofit, I'll always try to make sure that these risks are calculated and strategic to help the community as a whole, and not just one organization benefits from it. So that's how I calculate my risk. And I've taken some pretty big risks just to help the community. So that's why I said I may not be the best person to ask, or, but that's how I view it. If it's good for the community, if it's good for the organizations, if it's good for the people, let's do it.
I think to answer your question for me is I am like Jaden. I take pretty big risks, but as I'm taking my risks, I said one thing. I said, I fear failure, but I'm okay with it. But I also know my strengths, and I'm confident with my strengths. So if it's in my wheelhouse, and the risk comes to me and I see the reward, I know my strengths, and I'm confident in myself that I can achieve it if I'm focused and I'm all in. If I don't have the focus and I can't go all in, then I won't take the risk. But if I can be focused and I can go all in, I know I will have success, and I will deal with the small failures along the way if it's in my wheelhouse. If I go to something in the entertainment industry, I know I'm not going to be successful unless somebody on my team like Jaden is in it with me. But that's a side investment. If it's in healthcare in my wheelhouse and I can be focused and go all in it, I know I'll be successful. It's a risk that I will take if I can put the proper resources in it.
And you bring up a good point, making sure that whatever risk that you're taking, it's in your lane. You know, the common phrase, stay in your lane. Make sure that the whatever you're risking is in your lane, because like Phil said, like, you know, just opposites. I would never take a risk on a healthcare deal knowing nothing about healthcare unless I had someone like Phill on the bid with me, because that's not my lane. And like vice versa, if it's entertainment, I can do entertainment all day with my eyes closed. But healthcare, no, you got to bring someone in. So make sure that your risk makes sense. You got to make it make sense.
So when you say big risk, I'm not going to take a big risk that I'm not confident in myself, that I not do it, and I don't have the focus, and I'm not going to be able to go all in on.
Yes, and thank you for sharing your thoughts, guys. So there come a stage or a phase in the career or life. Some events will happen, like COVID. No one anticipated that, and where people will run out of their options, lanes, or call it, as Phil you mentioned, as wheelhouse. So, and how to expand the lanes and
So
at their strengths, how to work with.
I have a perfect example for you. So
Please.
I ran a durable medical equipment company, and all of a sudden COVID happened. Guess what? Hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, they didn't want my durable medical equipment. They did not want my durable medical equipment, and nobody could provide PPE. So I reached out to my resources in China. Guess what I got? I got PPE. But you also remember what I said, you think long-term and strategically. So while I was working the China PPE effort, I was working long-term on my next venture because PPE was short-term. So I was working on my next strategic effort and building out. So while people were banking in on the PPE and getting all that money, I wasn't getting a ton of money. I was making ends meet with it and thinking long term, because you have to continue to think long term. So you have to adjust, but adjust for the long term. So I adjusted for the short term and the long term on that. So you have to make quick adjustments, leverage your resources, leverage your network, but don't just leverage for the short term. And that's exactly what we were talking about earlier.
And
Thank you,
so
Phil.
another example, kind of similar to yours, Phil, is like, you know, in 2020, you know, we lost about 95% of our business in March, you know, just due to live events. You know, nobody was booking all the weddings that we had booked. Anything that we had pretty much booked as an act of God, we had to refund. So we refunded a lot of deposits. So it kind of put us in a deficit. And, you know, I'm like, okay, well, how can I keep my guys employed? How can I keep the company afloat? So, you know, we started live streaming funeral sessions. It's not the best thing to do, but it was hot back then and there. So it's like, okay, once we started live streaming the funeral sessions, I was like, okay, I got a couple contracts with the funeral homes, but this COVID thing, it's only going to be temporary. Like, and as far as temporary, I mean like the spike in the beginning. And so I was thinking, how can I, like you, Phil, how can I expand this? What is my long-term out? I started virtually curating events. And so I would do these virtual events for like nonprofits that wanted to have in-person award shows, but they couldn't because of COVID. So what we did is we basically would build a digital set and have to go on there to their site, set up a big green screen stage. And then over here in California, we would run the process and just do live shows like that. And then when they brought their live shows back, guess who was invited to come back and do their live shows? Creative Culture. So, I say that is, we did our short-term adjustment, live streaming for the funeral homes, and then we pivoted to actually doing virtual live streaming events, and which we still do. So that was kind of like how we shifted and we pivoted. We found a short-term solution and then turned it into a long-term solution, like Phill said.
Exactly. And it was so amazing and fascinating to hear your real life, real time examples, how you balanced your short term opportunities and look the long term and explore the options. And that's very, very, very insightful for the audience if they reflect enough. And there is a lot to gain on the examples that you shared. So, with that said, then moving on to the next question or topic is how do okay let me put it this way. So everything is in balance. We have experiments. We will pivot it and move on. And if your energy level and if your tempo is too high, you can try out 4 or 5 ideas or 4 or 5 initiatives, and let's say half of them are successful, right? And you call it as money making or you call it as impactful to the community, however it is successful, and you are sliced thin in those areas. And that brings in the concept of skin in the game. Is there a possibility for an entrepreneur who owns multiple organizations where they may prioritize a company or a organization, or deprioritize, or not putting enough energy in another company which is also a successful?
Yes, I mean we both own multiple
Yeah, I
companies.
was gonna say it happens.
Yeah, we both. I I have 4 or 5 organizations. I mean, and you have to prioritize, and you have to have the right team in place. So you have to have the right team in place and prioritize, and it goes back to the risk reward. So at different times, different organizations are going to be more profitable and do
Mhm.
different. Some organizations, I have one organization that's just on coast. It brings in its profit margins, it's coasting. I have
Right.
other organizations that are in growth mode. So some are just sustainability, some are growth, some are even in decline. So you
Mhm,
have to
mhm.
look at it at where they're at and and what is the long-term goal. There's a reason a
Mhm.
company is declining. It could be the marketplace. There's a
Right.
reason you have a company just in sustainability and just sustaining itself, and it's stabilized. And
Mhm.
you have to prioritize that, and that's done with the leadership team and what team you have in place, and creating a culture. And you have a culture within your team and putting the right leadership team in place. So
Mhm.
with the leadership team that I have put in place, you
Mhm.
have to create that right culture with them of empowerment, so they come to the table with you and they say, hey, this is what we want to do, this is where we're at right now. And then you have the right strategies in place so you're able to adapt and take the right risks at the right time with those organizations. But I'm constantly running 3 or 4 organizations at a time, if not more.
Yeah, and same here. And Phill, he really just hit the nail right on the head. There's each organization has different stages. Like Creative Culture, I mean, we're either in sustainability or growth. It just
Mhm.
goes back and forth because when we get our live events, that's just sustainability. But when we take on our new clients, that's when we grow. And like in the last 2 years, we've grown, and I didn't even think we would grow as much as we did. And so it's actually crazy, but it's actually allowed me to pivot more time to the nonprofit, because the nonprofit we started 2 years ago, but it stayed stagnant because we never did anything with it. And so now 2 years later, we're we're doing stuff with it. And so I would consider this as like the growth mode, but it comes down to, like Phill said, you got to get the right people in place to help you do this 5-10 year plan or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because, you know, all the people I work with, a lot of my core team, they're all creatives. And so, you know, with a creative, yeah, you can go to them and be like, hey, I'll give you $500 to do this. But at the end of the day, that's not going to motivate them. My guys are motivated by the verbiage that you use with them and how you empower them, because that's what they are. They're creatives. You know, like money is not always an incentive for my guys. I mean, they volunteer their time sometimes, you know, through the nonprofits. So it's like they do it because they love what we're doing as an organization and they see the bigger goals. And so I just try to empower them in that way to stick with us, because like Phill said, if you're going to grow, if you're going to have a solid organization, your team has to be on point.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear what you say, and having the right team. And you mentioned core team, Jaden, and Phill. You mentioned the leadership group or leadership team that brings or helps you to define the sustainability, business, or growth or decline. So there is one fine nuance that I would like to hone in is, let's say, from your perspective as an entrepreneur, you have a sustainable business going on, or a sustainable organization that may have a potential to become growth, but your area of focus, your energy is in other area where that is also in a growth area. But the people, or the right people, core team or leadership team that you're referring to, they have 100% skin in the game, whereas for you it is 100%, but it is split into 4 or 5 streams. So when leadership team, or the core team comes to you and propose an idea or experiment to try it out, how you as an entrepreneur, or the owner of that company, will respond. And that goes back to Jaden, what you said. It's not just money or something else, how you engage, how do you interact. So what is your real-time experience in such scenarios?
I just put someone in charge. You know, I put someone in charge. If I see someone that's done really, really well, I give them a chance to lead. I don't ever I don't want people to feel like they can't take charge and step up and create in their full capacity. I don't mind passing the torch. You know, I'm all about, you know, having people, because you have skin in the game. And it's particularly, I guess, okay, so the best way I can explain it. So creative culture, I'm not the sole owner of. You know, all of my creatives own a stake in creative culture, and I do this so that way they feel like they are entitled, like they own the company, because they do. And so when they do this and they put their 100% skin in the game, then I can go to my one creative and be like, okay, hey, you're gonna lead this project, or hey, I need you to lead this while I step away and do this, and it's worked for me. At least in my experience, I haven't had any problem out of my creatives running creative culture or working with clients or traveling or doing anything while I work within the nonprofit. So for me on that end, it's been very fruitful, and I think people appreciate when you empower them to be in a position of leadership. And of course, not everybody works out, but that's why you gotta pick your team right.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, you talk about skin in the game. You always want to empower your people. If they come to you project or they see growth opportunity, you evaluate it, you vet it with them. If it's appropriate, you put a very strategic plan in place and allow them to run with it strategically. And you look at that plan, and if it's strategically appropriate, you run with it. So you want to empower your folks as much as possible. You talk about skin in the game. The one thing I know, I have my business partners as well, and I think it was Gary V that said it. If you guys ever listen to Gary V,
Yeah.
No one's ever going to have as much skin in the game as the business.
Yeah.
So you want to empower your people as much as you possibly can.
Nice.
So if they do come to you with a project or something they want to do, you want to sit down and work with them, and you want to make sure that they're invested as much as you possibly can. So if that's trying to make sure they have opportunity for growth or whatever it might be, you want to make sure you give them that opportunity and give them as much skin in the game as you possibly can, because nobody's going to work as hard as the business owner.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you expect, and you can
Yeah.
never expect that. So if you have that expectation in your head, you're a fool.
Mhm.
Exactly. And last 2 minutes, what you both shared, hit record, repeat, and listen that. And this is
You're a fool if you have that expectation.
right, right. Every entrepreneur needs to operate in that way, and very insightful thoughts. Thanks for sharing that. So this is a great conversation. We just scratched the surface of risk-savvy entrepreneurship in the conference, and maybe we just dig deep by our feet into that, and then there is a lot to explore. But considering the time we have, a generic question, and then it's up to you guys how deep you want to go, or how do you want to pace this. But what are the what are the generic life lessons that you can offer to us and audience with respect to risk savvy entrepreneurship with your experience so far?
Honestly, it's simple. Everything that happens is complicated, but the life lessons in it are simple. Like Phil, we mentioned earlier, instead of when you take your risk, don't look at it. If it doesn't go the way that you plan, don't look at it as a loss. It's a lesson. You got to turn that L around and give it a different, it's your perspective on the whole situation. So a lot of this is perspective, and you got to simplify it, because the world is going to get complicated, but there's always simple principles that get us through. So make sure you take your lessons, you take calculated strategic risks, and just dominate your craft, and don't give up, and empower people along the way when you do it too. But that's really what it's like. That's my opinion on it.
I think I might be every talk or almost talk I give, I speak, I try to say something to this effect. My father is my hero, my brothers are my mentors, and something they always taught me is easy come, easy go. And as quickly as it comes, it can go. You can always lose it. I've lost it many times. And they taught me something, and I think I mentioned this last time, and it's about work ethic. There's always somebody chasing you to be as good as you. And there's
Right.
always somebody smarter than you that's ahead of you that you need to chase to constantly learn and catch. So always strive to get better and never stay stagnant. So, always strive to be better, and you can always lose it. Be humble and strive to get, those three gentlemen are mentors, and always teach me to get better.
Thank you, Phil. And there is and then after listening to you folks, and then the practical guidance and experiences that you have, and the wisdom that you has gathered over a period of time from your successes or maybe failures, let's call me that out. You guys have a lot to offer, and just packaging that in one webinar is not. And based on, we don't know how next things will evolve, and we are looking forward to what next. And then definitely you have a lot to offer, and then especially for our audience, and the budding entrepreneurs across the globe, this is the key conversation. And it was great chatting with you, and thanks for giving us the time, and looking forward to connect sometime soon. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks.